Nice shoes, Carl. Did the thrift store have a clearance sale? The laughter hit harder than the words. A dozen suits cracked up, echoing across the glass hall while Carl bent down to pick up a coffee cup. Someone had dropped. He didn't look up. He just kept wiping the stain until the marble shone again. The CEO, Claire Donovan, stood at the head of the meeting table, smiling for the crowd. "We're raising our standards this quarter," she said, gesturing toward the spotless floor. "From branding to footwear." More laughter. Carl straightened slowly, the old mop handle creaking in his hand. His eyes stayed on the floor, but his voice, quiet, steady, carried through the room. "The floor's clean, ma'am. That's what I came to do." Her smile faltered for a moment, almost like she heard something behind his calm, but the meeting went on. Numbers, slides, applause. No one noticed the man who kept working through it. By the door, a young intern named Maya shifted uncomfortably. She hadn't been there long enough to laugh at other people yet. Watching him gather his tools, she felt a twist of shame she couldn't name. When the lights dimmed for the next presentation, Carl moved toward the exit. Someone whispered, "Guess he's used to it." Maybe he was, but something in the way he paused, hand resting briefly on the wall where an old framed photo used to hang, said otherwise. Outside, the hum of vacuum machines swallowed the noise of the meeting. He took a breath, eyes closed for half a second, and whispered to himself, "Same walls, different people." Then he pushed his cart down the corridor, quiet as always. Maya turned back to the laughter echoing behind her, wondering who he used to be before he learned to stay silent. And that silence, that was where the real story began. From where are you watching around the world? Let me know in the comments below. Carl's day always began before the city woke. By the time dawn brushed the skyline, he was already inside the building, keys jingling like small reminders of borrowed authority. The lobby lights hummed to life one by one as he passed through, his reflection following him in every polished surface. He liked the quiet. It was the only hour when the building still felt honest, before the perfume of ambition filled its halls. He set down his thermos beside the maintenance cart, the one that had a loose wheel he'd been meaning to fix. "Not today," he murmured, rubbing the handle like it was an old friend. There was always more to do than time allowed. Down the corridor, he tightened a wobbling door hinge, replaced a flickering bulb, and cleared the dust from a vent that no one else would ever notice. To most, these were invisible tasks. To Carl, they were the kind of work that made things last. The quiet kind. The kind you do right even when no one's watching. In his locker sat a folded photograph, wrapped in an old handkerchief. Every morning he unfolded it, looked at the smiling faces, and folded it back again. It was his first day at the company, 30 years ago. Back then he wasn't holding a mop. He was wearing a clean blue shirt, the word assistant engineer stitched above his pocket. Next to him stood Richard Donovan, the company's founder. Richard was the kind of leader who remembered people's names, even the ones who cleaned up after the meetings. He'd clap Carl on the shoulder and say, "We don't build machines here, son. We build trust." Carl still lived by those words long after Richard passed away, but the world around him stopped listening. When the company restructured, trust was the first thing replaced by numbers. Carl's department merged, titles vanished, and those who didn't fit the new image quietly disappeared. He was offered janitorial work instead. Temporary, they said. That was 10 years ago. He could have left. He didn't, because leaving would have meant letting go of the place where he'd built a life, where his wife had once dropped by with lunchboxes, where his daughter learned to walk between those same corridors. Now, she was studying environmental engineering, following the dream he never finished. He sent her small transfers each month, every one built from double shifts and quiet endurance. She thought he still worked in maintenance. He never corrected her. Pride was a fragile thing. You learn to protect it in silence. Carl's mornings passed in a rhythm he knew by heart. Coffee at 6, floor inspections by 7, staff arriving by 8, and by 9 he faded into the background like furniture, until someone needed him again. At 10:15 that day, the same intern from the meeting, Maya, caught him in the break room fixing a loose table leg. "You're really early every day, huh?" she said softly. Carl smiled without looking up. "Tables don't fix themselves." She hesitated. "I'm sorry about what happened earlier. It wasn't fair." He shrugged, twisting the screwdriver once more. "Fairness is seasonal here, comes and goes." She didn't know how to reply, so she just watched him work, slow, steady, deliberate, like every turn of the tool meant something. On his lunch break, Carl sat outside the service entrance, eating from a small metal box. Inside were rice, eggs and a note his daughter had written weeks ago before heading back to college. "Keep eating right, Dad. No skipping meals." He smiled, tracing her handwriting with calloused fingers. Inside, through the tinted windows, he could see Claire Donovan, the CEO, moving briskly between meetings, heels sharp against the tile. The resemblance to her father was undeniable in profile. Same jaw, same stride, but the warmth was gone, replaced by glass and steel. She didn't see him, of course. People like him had become part of the furniture in her world, there but unseen. Still, something in him couldn't forget the day she visited the plant as a little girl, holding her father's hand. He had been there, adjusting a control valve, when she waved at him shyly. Richard had smiled and said, "Carl, meet my daughter Claire. Someday she'll run this place." He never imagined that promise would come full circle like this. Her in the corner office, and him sweeping its floors. Later that afternoon, Carl was repairing an air filter when an executive walked by and said, "Make sure that vent's spotless. The CEO hates dust. It looks unprofessional." Carl nodded. "Dust doesn't care who it lands on," he said quietly, wiping another streak away. The man blinked, unsure if it was sarcasm or philosophy, and walked off. When the day finally ended, Carl stayed behind, checking each corridor one last time. The lights above flickered softly, and the reflection of his shoes glimmered faintly on the marble floor. They were old, yes, scuffed and uneven, but they had carried him through more storms than anyone in that building would ever know. He looked again at the empty space on the wall where the founder's photo used to hang. It had been removed months ago during the rebranding. Outdated image, they'd said. For a moment he pictured that old photograph in his locker, the handshake, the pride, the sense of belonging. Then he whispered under his breath, "We built trust," and walked away before the lights went out. Tomorrow, he knew, would start the same, but deep down something had already shifted. A quiet awareness that the walls might remember more than the people did. And somewhere down the hallway, the intern was still thinking about him, replaying the laughter from that morning, and wondering how long a man could stay invisible before someone finally saw him again. "Carl, you're needed upstairs. The CEO wants the top floor spotless before tomorrow's investor meet." The voice came from Thomas, the head of facilities, a man who rarely left his desk but always knew how to pass orders downward. Carl nodded, wiping his hands on a rag. He wasn't sure why the request felt heavier than usual. The CEO's floor was sacred ground, usually handled by the newer staff, who moved like shadows and spoke in whispers. Still, he packed his supplies and rode the service elevator up. The hum of the lift echoed in his ears, like old memories vibrating against new nerves. When the doors opened, the air itself seemed different, colder, perfumed, rehearsed. Claire Donovan stood near the wide windows, phone in hand, issuing commands with the same precision her father once reserved for blueprints. When she saw Carl, her gaze flicked down to his shoes. "Ah, our maintenance specialist," she said with a thin smile. "We're expecting key investors tomorrow morning. I want every inch of this floor immaculate, especially the glass wall and that memorial plaque by the conference room. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." "And Carl," she added, eyes pausing on him, "please wear the new company uniform tomorrow. Presentation matters." He nodded, knowing the unspoken words that followed, "and upgrade those shoes." She didn't say it, but her assistant did, catching up behind her. "We'll reimburse you if you purchase something appropriate," the assistant whispered, almost apologetic. Carl managed a half smile. "These ones still do the job." The assistant hesitated. "Maybe, but appearances matter to her." "I've noticed," he replied gently. When the office emptied, the silence felt heavier than usual. The sunlight faded into the soft reflection of city lights, and Carl began his work, polishing floors that already shined, cleaning glass that already gleamed. From the corner of the executive lounge, he heard voices drifting through the half-open door of a conference room. "Can you believe she's turning her father's company into a fashion brand?" one man said, laughing quietly. Another replied, "Richard Donovan built this place on integrity and hard work. Now it's all image and buzzwords. No wonder half the senior staff left." Carl froze, the mop in his hand still dripping faintly. Hearing the founder's name spoken like that, not with respect but nostalgia, stirred something deep inside. He stepped back into the shadows, listening. "She doesn't even know half the people who kept this place running in her dad's time. There's a rumor one of them still works here, some old maintenance guy who used to be an Inger." They laughed again. "If he's smart, he's long gone." Carl set the mop back into the bucket, heartbeat slow and heavy. Gone. Maybe he should have been. But something kept him here. Loyalty, maybe, or the ghost of a promise made long ago. When he returned to his locker later, the fluorescent light above flickered. He sat on the bench, staring at his shoes. They were cracked at the edges, soles thin, but still dependable. He ran a thumb over the worn leather and sighed. That's when Maya appeared in the doorway, holding a small bottle of polish. "I heard about the investor visit," she said softly. "You really don't have to buy new shoes. We can make these shine again." He smiled faintly. "You've got other work to do." "Not tonight," she replied. "Let me help." Carl hesitated but then nodded. He sat back as she knelt, applying a thin layer of polish. The smell of wax mixed with the faint scent of detergent in the air. "These have stories in them," she said, brushing the surface gently. "They've walked through a few," he said with a small chuckle. "Some good, some worth forgetting." She looked up at him. "Did you know her father?" Carl paused, surprised by the question. "Yes. A long time ago." "Was he really different?" He didn't answer right away. He just leaned back, remembering the laughter in the old plant. The way Richard Donovan used to walk the floor, shaking hands with workers like they were equals. "He was the thin of man who made you want to do your best," Carl finally said. "Not because you feared him, because you respected him." Maya nodded slowly. "Then I hope she figures out what that feels like someday." Carl smiled faintly. "Maybe she will, if someone reminds her." The clock struck 8. Most of the building had gone dark except for the top floor, where he still had to finish polishing the glass walls. When he returned upstairs, the echoes of the executive's earlier laughter lingered like ghosts in the corners. But something new had settled inside him, a quiet curiosity, almost a calling. As he wiped the memorial plaque by the conference room, the one engraved with "In honor of Richard Donovan, who built with hands and heart," he caught his own reflection faintly mirrored beside the founder's name. For the first time in years, he whispered the thought he'd long buried. Maybe it's time the right people remembered how this place was built. He stepped back, placed his hand gently on the plaque, and nodded once. Tomorrow, the investors would come, and everything would look perfect on the surface. But Carl could feel something deeper stirring beneath the polish, something that couldn't stay buried forever. "Carl, check that hallway one last time." "The live stream crew's setting up," Thomas called, half whispering, half panicking as executives hurried past with tablets and clipboards. Carl nodded, pushing his cart toward the end of the top floor corridor. The morning felt too polished, too rehearsed. Even the air smelled expensive, citrus and anxiety. The investor event had transformed the building into a stage. A row of lights lined the conference wall. Cameras stood ready. The company's future and the CEO's reputation balanced on this single performance. Carl worked quietly in the background, unseen but essential. He was wiping fingerprints from the glass door when someone from the media team waved him aside. "Sir, please move the cart. You're in frame." He rolled it away, careful not to touch any cables. But as he stepped back, the corner of his sleeve brushed against a cord. A light flickered, just for a second, then stabilized. He fixed it immediately. No harm done. The live stream began. Claire Donovan stepped forward, radiant under the spotlights, her voice confident and rehearsed. "At Donovan Industries, we don't just innovate products, we innovate people." The investors clapped. The camera panned to the audience, then slowly toward the back wall. That's when it happened. Carl, unaware the stream was still live, bent down to pick up a stray napkin that had blown near the stage. His reflection appeared clearly behind Claire, a janitor, mop in hand, right in the middle of a global broadcast meant to showcase perfection. The chat feed on the monitor lit up instantly.
"Who's the old guy?"
"Is that part of the ad? Hire new PR." The media coordinator waved frantically. "Cut the feed. Cut." Claire turned, eyes narrowing as she saw him. "Carl," she hissed, the microphone still on, "please tell me you're not mopping in the middle of a live event." The audience laughed uneasily. Cameras caught everything. Carl straightened slowly, setting the mop aside. "Just cleaning a spill, ma'am. Didn't want anyone to slip." "Do you realize what you've done?" she snapped. "We're presenting to global partners, and she gestured at him like the site itself was the problem. In frame. Silence. Even the investors looked uncomfortable. Maya stood near the equipment table, heart pounding. "He was just doing his job," she blurted. Claire turned sharply. "Not now, Maya." "But," I said. "Not now." Maya's face flushed, her courage shrinking under the weight of the room. Carl bowed his head slightly. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It won't happen again." Her voice softened just enough to sound polite for the cameras. "Let's hope not." The event continued, but the energy had shifted. The laughter was forced. The applause thinner. Carl quietly wheeled his cart out, each squeak of the wheel echoing louder than any word spoken. Down the service corridor, he paused by the elevator and took a breath that didn't quite reach his lungs. His hands trembled slightly. He wasn't angry, just hollow. The kind of hollow that comes when dignity cracks for the second time in front of the same crowd. By noon, the news had already spread through internal chat. Janitor photobombed CEO's live stream. Some found it funny. Others pitied him. None cared enough to ask what really happened. Maya found him later in the maintenance room, packing his things into a small duffel bag. "You're not leaving, are you?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "I think my shift's finally over." "You don't have to quit because of her," she said quickly. "She was embarrassed, that's all." "Maybe," he said, zipping the bag. "But sometimes you need to leave before you start resenting what you once respected." He placed his work badge on the bench, the same one he'd worn for 10 years without promotion, without complaint. Maya bit her lip, eyes glassy. "At least talk to her before you decide." Carl shook his head. Talking won't fix what people choose not to see. He turned toward the exit, bag over his shoulder, when Thomas appeared at the door. "Carl, hold up. I already cleared my shift." "I know, but Claire's assistant just called. They need someone to tidy up the old office, Mr. Donovan's room. They're archiving it this evening." Carl stopped walking. The old office. No one had mentioned that place in years. It had been sealed since the founder's passing, left mostly untouched. Thomas continued, oblivious to the weight of the request. "Apparently, the CEO wants it ready before the storage crew arrives tomorrow. She said you'd know what to do." Carl hesitated. "She said that?" "Yeah, her exact words. He was here in my father's time. Let him close it out properly." Something flickered behind Carl's tired eyes. Confusion, maybe even respect. He nodded slowly. "All right, I'll finish it tonight." Thomas exhaled in relief. "Appreciate it, Carl. You're one of the good ones." When the corridor emptied, Carl stood alone with his duffel bag at his feet. He looked down at the worn shoes, the same ones that had carried him from pride to ridicule and back again, and quietly set the bag aside. For now, he'd stay. Not for the job, not for her, for the memory of the man whose name still hung on that brass plaque. He picked up his cart once more, the loose wheels squeaking down the hall, heading toward the office of a man who had once believed in him. The old office hadn't been opened in years. The air inside carried a stillness that didn't belong to the rest of the building, a silence that held its own kind of dignity. Carl pushed the door open slowly, the hinges releasing a tired sigh, like they too remembered better days. Dust hung in faint lines where sunlight crept through the blinds. The room looked frozen in time. An oak desk, a cracked leather chair, shelves of forgotten ledgers, and the faint smell of paper and machine oil. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before stepping in. "Hello, sir," he said quietly, not to anyone there, but to the memory of a man who once called him by name. The brass nameplate still read Richard Donovan, founder. Someone had tried to polish it recently, but the gleam didn't hide the small scratches that came from years of use. Carl ran his finger across the letters, feeling each ridge like braille for the past. He set down his tools and began to work. Not with the haste of duty, but with reverence, like a son tending his father's grave. He wiped the dust from the chair, arranged the pens that hadn't been touched in over a decade, and straightened the picture frames that leaned slightly off-center. Each photo was a story. Richard at a groundbreaking ceremony. Richard shaking hands with early investors. Richard laughing beside a team of engineers, men in oil-stained coveralls with honest eyes. Carl paused on one in particular, the old plant floor. He could almost smell the metal shavings, the warm grease of machines, the steady rhythm of teamwork. He had been there that day, helping calibrate the first conveyor system. His hand had been on one of those bolts that kept everything running smoothly. He smiled faintly, then sighed. "Feels like another lifetime." As he moved behind the desk to dust the drawers, one handle refused to open. It was locked, the top right drawer, small and unassuming. He tugged gently again. Nothing. Carl looked around and spotted a thin key taped beneath the drawer lip. The founder's habits hadn't changed. He always believed in keeping a backup close. Carl chuckled softly at the memory. Richard once told Till, "Never trust a man who doesn't plan for the day he forgets his keys." He turned the lock. It clicked open with a tired sound, revealing a neat stack of papers, an old pen, and a leather-bound photo album. The cover was cracked but intact, stamped with the company's first logo, a gear surrounding a handshake. Carl lifted it carefully, brushing away the thin film of dust. He sat at the desk, the same seat where he once stood nervously during performance reviews decades ago. The first few pages were photos from the early days. Small offices, smiling faces, half-built machines and handwritten captions in Richard's neat handwriting. First product shipped. New patent approved. Our people, our right. Carl turned another page. There it was. The group photo from the company's first anniversary. He recognized nearly every face. But what made him freeze was the figure standing just to the founder's left. A younger serpent of himself, hair still black, uniform crisp, smile full of purpose. Next to him, small, holding a paper flower, was a little girl with bright eyes. Claire, the same woman who now walked past him as if he were part of the wallpaper. For a long while Carl didn't move. His fingers hovered above the image, afraid to smudge what was left of that day. He could still remember it. The laughter, the smell of cake, Richard's booming voice saying, "Everyone, meet my daughter. She's the future." She had waved shyly back then. He had bent down to hand her the flower she was holding in the photo. Her father had smiled. Cameras had clicked, and somewhere in between, that small gesture was captured. A man and a child in a frame that neither would remember the same way. Now, decades later, that same child had forgotten the hand that once held hers steady. Carl closed the album gently, pressing his palm against the cover like sealing a heartbeat back into a chest. His eyes stung, not from dust, but from the kind of grief that doesn't weep, only litens quietly around the ribs. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "Guess we both grew up in this place," he whispered. "Just took different directions." Outside, the city lights blinked against the window, reflections merging with the faint gleam of his old shoes. He thought about all the years between that photo and this moment. Promotions he never asked for, loyalty no one noticed, and a respect that had slowly turned into invisibility. He picked up the album again and turned to the back pages. There were a few loose photographs tucked in, candid shots of workers, a company picnic, and one of Richard standing beside a half-built factory, leaves rolled up, smiling at the camera. Behind him, barely visible in the corner, was Carl again, young, determined, eyes full of belief. He exhaled slowly. "So that's where I left him." The clock on the wall ticked faintly, a sound too soft to fill the silence. He thought of calling Maya, showing her the photo, proof that the company's history wasn't written in reports but in hands like his. But he didn't. Some memories deserve to breathe quietly before being shared. Instead, he found a clean cloth, wrapped the album carefully, and placed it on top of the desk. Then he sat back, the faint hum of the building settling into a rhythm around him. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like an intruder in this office. He felt like someone who belonged, even if only in the shadows of its past. The thought warmed and hurt him at the same time. He looked again at the founder's nameplate and whispered, "You were right, Richard. We built trust. But they built walls." He reached into his pocket, pulled out his old employee badge, and placed it beside the album. The two lay there, a name that built the company, and a man who quietly kept it running long after everyone ever noticing. Before leaving, Carl turned off the desk lamp but paused at the door. One last look at the desk, the chair, the photo, the nameplate, a lifetime condensed into stillness. He locked the room behind him and slipped the key into his pocket. Down the hall, the lights flickered again, the same tired bulbs that always needed fixing. Tomorrow, he'd come early to replace them. He wasn't sure why, maybe because even broken things deserved a little light. As he walked away, the sound of his footsteps echoed softly, like an old song only he could still remember. And for the first time in a long time, Carl didn't feel invisible. He felt seen, if only by the ghosts of the past that never forgot him. The next morning, the office was quiet again. Carl had returned early, hoping to finish before anyone noticed he was still there. The memory of yesterday's embarrassment clung to him like a shadow he couldn't shake. He unlocked the founder's office once more, this time to give it one final wipe down before the archival team came. The air inside felt gentler now, as if the room remembered the peace of being seen again after years of silence. He placed the old photo album on the desk and opened it carefully, letting the soft morning light fall on the faces of people long gone. Engineers, accountants, secretaries, the ones who built the foundation beneath all this glass and steel. His hand lingered on his younger self again, beside the founder and that little girl holding her paper flower. "Wow!" Carl startled slightly. Maya stood in the doorway, clutching her tablet, her eyes wide. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "Thomas told me you were still here. I just came to trot off the key inventory list." He smiled faintly. You're fine. Her gaze fell on the album. Is that? He nodded. Your boss's father's collection. Found it in the drawer. She stepped closer, leaning over his shoulder. That's you, she whispered, pointing at the photo. Yeah, he said quietly. A long time ago. And that's her, Maya added, eyes moving to the little girl beside him. She was here. She grew up around you. Carl said nothing for a moment, then closed the album softly. Seems. Maya frowned. She doesn't even know. She talks about legacy and leadership. But you're in that legacy. Shouldn't she see this? He looked at her, not with anger or sadness, but something older, deeper. Some lessons, he said, people have to find on their own. If you hand it to them too soon, they just see paper, not meaning. Maya sighed, frustrated. Still, it feels wrong, like history's hiding in a box while everyone pretends it never existed. Carl smiled faintly, wiping the cover with his sleeve. That's how most history stays clean. The room went still again. Dust motes floated between them like slow snow. Do you ever miss it? She asked, quietly. Every day, he said. But missing something doesn't mean you want it back. Sometimes you just want to know it mattered. She nodded, trying to swallow the lump in her throat. Outside, the sound of heels clicked down the hallway. The rhythm was unmistakable, sharp, decisive, echoing authority. Claire Donovan appeared in the doorway, flanked by her assistant. Her expression was taut, the kind that came from too many late-night emails and too little sleep. Mr. Hale, she said briskly, I was told there's been a delay clearing this office. We're on a tight schedule with the archive team. Carl stood, wiping his hands on a cloth. Almost finished, ma'am. Just making sure everything's handled with care. Her eyes fell on the photo album resting on the desk. What's that? Something that belonged to your father, he said evenly. Locked in the drawer. She hesitated before replying. That'll be sent to storage with the rest. Of course. She turned slightly, then stopped when Maya spoke. Ma'am, you might want to see what's inside first. Claire raised an eyebrow. And you are? Maya, internship program, communications division. Her voice shook slightly but didn't waver. There's something important in there. Carl shot her a gentle look. Not anger, just quiet caution. Claire approached the desk, flipping open the album with a practiced impatience. Old photos? She muttered. We have digital copies of most of these. Then she turned to the anniversary photo. Her voice caught, only slightly, but enough to make her assistant glance over in surprise. That's you, Maya said softly. Claire's eyes flickered. I remember this, vaguely. My father's first company event. And that's him, Maya added, nodding toward Carl. Claire looked closer, disbelief flickering into recognition. That can't be. It is, Carl said quietly. I used to work in engineering, long time ago. The silence that followed was heavier than any reprimand could have been. Claire straightened slowly, closing the album. I didn't realize, she said, her tone restrained, professional, but softer than usual. You've been here a long time. He nodded. Since your father's second year. He gave me my start. She blinked, something uncertain moving behind her composure. I see. Her assistant cleared her throat softly, sensing tension but unsure how to ease it. Ma'am, the investors are waiting in the lobby. Reschedule, Claire said quickly. 15 minutes. The assistant nodded and slipped out, leaving her in the room with Carl and Maya. Claire looked at the desk again, then back at Carl. You should have said something. About knowing my father. He smiled faintly. Didn't think it mattered anymore. It does, she said quietly, sincerely. For a brief second, the sharpness in her eyes dulled. She looked around the office, taking in the old chair, the dusted shelves, the faint scent of polish. It was as if she was seeing it all for the first time. Not as property but as memory. I didn't know this room was still like this, she murmured. I thought it had been stripped years ago. Some things hold on, Carl said. Even when we stop looking. She nodded absently, still scanning the space. Then her phone buzzed, shattering the fragile stillness. She picked it up, tone shifting back to command. Yes, I'll be down shortly. When she hung up, her gaze lingered on him one more moment. Finish up and send the album to my office before the end of the day. Yes, ma'am. She left without another word. Maya waited until the sound of her heels disappeared, then turned to Carl. Maybe she is starting to remember. Carl shook his head, his tone gentle but certain. Not yet. Right now she just knows. Remembering takes longer. He placed the album back on the desk, fingers tracing its edge. She'll find her way? Maya asked. He smiled, tired but hopeful. If she's anything like her father, she will. Outside the window, the sun had started breaking through the clouds, light streaking across the city towers like a quiet reminder that even the coldest glass could reflect warmth if you looked from the right angle. Carl picked up his rag again, resuming the work as if nothing had happened. But somewhere deep down, a small bridge had been built. Not between job titles, but between two lives divided by time and pride. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. By the end of the week, the founder's office had become an island between two worlds, the old one that remembered, and the new one pretending it didn't. Claire Donovan stood at the door one evening, tablet in hand, watching as Carl adjusted a stack of framed photos on the desk. The investors had left. The staff had gone home. Only the hum of the air vents filled the silence. "Mr. Hale," she began, her voice measured, "I'd like you to stay a bit longer tonight. There are a few things from my father's office I'd rather not trust to the archive team. You knew him, so you'll know what should stay." Carl nodded, wiping his hands. "Of course, ma'am." For the first time, she didn't correct his tone or hurry him. She simply stepped inside and placed the tablet on the desk. "I'll be here as well. There are personal items I'd like to sort through." She slipped off her blazer, revealing a weariness she usually hid behind posture and polish. Carl noticed it but said nothing. He moved to the bookshelf, carefully dusting each spine before pulling the loose volumes aside. "What was he like?" she asked suddenly. The question surprised even her. Carl glanced over. "You'd know better than anyone." She gave a faint smile, one without armor. "Maybe as a father, not as the man who ran this company. I only saw that part through glass walls." Carl hesitated, then said, "He treated everyone the same. Didn't matter if you wore a suit or carried a toolbox. He believed respect wasn't a rank, it was a choice." Claire looked down at her tablet, fingers stilling on the screen. "He used to say that at home too. I thought it was just philosophy." He smiled faintly. "It was practice." She fell silent for a moment, then walked to the window. "I don't remember you from back then," she admitted. "I was probably too young." "You were," he said. "About 7, maybe 8. Used to visit him on Fridays. You'd sit under that same desk while he signed papers. Said it made you feel like you were running the company." Her head turned, eyes softening as she pictured it. "He let me stamp the approval sheets once. I thought I'd invented management." Carl chuckled quietly. "You looked very official doing it." She looked at him longer this time, studying his face as if searching for the years she'd missed. "You really were there," she said softly. "All this time?" He nodded, not in the same way. But yes, there was no bitterness in his tone, only calm truth. That, more than anything, unsettled her. She was used to defensiveness, excuses, negotiations, not this kind of stillness. He reached for a small box from the bottom shelf. "You might want to keep this. Company's first patent approval." She leaned closer. "I didn't even know we still had the original file. Your father insisted on keeping one physical copy," Carl said. "Said the day paper stopped mattering. People would start believing promises didn't either." She smiled at that, faintly. "That sounds like him." Maya appeared at the doorway just then, carrying a tray with 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you both might need this," she said. Claire blinked, surprised. "You're still here too?" Maya shrugged. "Just finishing my internship hours." Carl accepted his cup with a nod of thanks. Claire did the same, more slowly, as if unused to being handed things instead of expecting them. The three worked quietly for a while. Boxes opened, files sorted. The room began to breathe again. Every so often, Claire would ask about an item, a photo, a tool, a handwritten note, and Carl would share what he remembered, the story behind a scratched ruler, the meaning of a phrase scribbled in pencil on the desk corner. She listened, really listened. "You remember all this like it was yesterday," she said eventually. Carl smiled. "When you spend half your life somewhere, the walls start talking to you." She looked around, the weight of his words landing gently. "I think they've been talking to me too," she said quietly. "I just stopped hearing them." Maya, watching from the side, noticed the change. The way Claire's posture softened, how her tone no longer carried the sharp edge of command. When the clock hit 8, Carl started gathering his things. "That should do it. I'll lock up after you're done." But Claire stopped him. "Wait. One more thing." She reached into the drawer and pulled out the old photo album he had found days earlier. "You left this here. Didn't seem right taking it," he replied. "It belongs to the company." "To you?" She looked down at the cover. "It belongs to both," she said softly. "To what was built before me, and what's left of it now." Carl didn't answer. He only nodded. understanding more than words could say. After a moment, she spoke again, almost hesitantly. You know, when I took over, people said I needed to modernize, make it cleaner, sharper, more corporate. But somewhere along the way, I think I stripped out the parts that made this place human. He gave a quiet smile. It happens to all of us. We polish until the reflection disappears. She met his eyes, and for the first time there wasn't a wall between them. You make it sound simple. It's simple, he said. Just not easy. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind that comes after years of misunderstanding begin to loosen their grip. Finally, she said, "Thank you, Mr. Hale, for keeping this room and my father's memory intact." He inclined his head. Wasn't hard. Just needed someone to care enough to remember. When he left, she watched him go, not as an employee fading into the background, but as someone whose presence lingered like the faint echo of her father's laughter in these same walls. Maya lingered behind, smiling faintly. "You see it too, don't you?" she asked Claire. "See what?" "That he's still teaching, just like your father did." Claire looked toward the door where Carl had disappeared and exhaled slowly. "Yes," she said, "and I think I'm finally ready to listen." Outside, the city lights pulsed against the glass, and in that reflection, for the briefest moment, the past and present stood side by side, the founder's daughter and the man who helped raise the company she now led. It wasn't friendship yet, not forgiveness, not even trust, but it was the beginning of something honest, and in a building full of polished lies, that was more valuable than gold. It started with a photograph. Someone from the marketing team had snapped a candid shot during those quiet after-hours sessions. Claire Donovan standing beside Carl Hale, sleeves rolled up, sorting through old company files. The photo had been harmless at first, a CEO reconnecting with the company's roots, but in the wrong hands, even decency could be twisted into scandal. By morning, the image was everywhere on the internal company feed with captions like, "From boardrooms to brooms, CEO's new mentorship program," and Claire's latest strategy, "Bond with the help." Laughter rippled through office chat groups. Memes followed. One executive, Brett Lang, head of marketing and Claire's most vocal critic, forwarded the post to investors with a smug comment. "Our leader seems more concerned with nostalgia than innovation." By the time Claire arrived at work, the air was thick with gossip disguised as politeness. Every conversation stopped when she walked past. Every smile carried the weight of a suppressed smirk. She walked straight into her office and slammed the door. Her assistant, nervous and pale, held out a tablet. "Ma'am, it's circulating online now. Someone leaked it outside the company." The screen glowed with a headline, "CEO gets sentimental. Photo sparks questions about professional boundaries." Claire's jaw tightened. "Boundaries?" she repeated, voice low. "He's a janitor, not a PR stunt." Her assistant hesitated. "It's being framed as a distraction from investor concerns." For a moment she said nothing. Then she turned toward the window, watching her reflection blur against the skyline. All the progress she'd made in the last week, the fragile reconnection, the quiet thaw, felt like it was collapsing back into old armor. "Get Lang in here," she said finally. Minutes later, Brett strolled in, too confident to hide it. "Rough morning, huh? Did you leak it?" she asked flatly. He raised his eyebrows, feigning surprise. "Claire, please. It was on the internal network already. People talk. You can't stop them." She stepped closer. "You've been waiting for a chance to humiliate me." He smirked. "You did that yourself, playing history teacher with the janitorial staff. This is a corporate environment, not a nostalgia club." She inhaled slowly, steadying her voice. "Get out." He shrugged. "Of course. But you might want to do some damage control. Investors don't like blurred lines." When he left, she stood frozen. The words "blurred lines" echoed in her mind like a threat. By noon, investors were calling. Her board liaison demanded a statement. Every email felt like a blade disguised as advice. She could almost hear her father's voice, "Lead with integrity, not image." But then came her own fear. What if image is all that's left? At 2 p.m. she called Carl into her office. He entered quietly, toolbox in hand as always. "You wanted to see me, ma'am." Claire didn't look up from her tablet. "There's been an issue. I've seen the photos," he said calmly. "Then you understand why this can't continue." He didn't answer. She finally looked up, meeting his eyes. "It's creating problems for the company, and for me. I need to maintain professional distance. The board expects consistency." He nodded slowly. "Consistency," he repeated, as if tasting the word. That's what your father used to call doing the right thing twice in a row. Her expression hardened. Mr. Hale, please don't. He raised a hand gently, stopping her. You don't have to explain, ma'am. I've been through this cycle before. Respect turns into ridicule the moment someone else sees it. Carl, this isn't personal. Of course it is, he said softly. It always is when people forget what respect looks like. She flinched. I'm sorry, but I have to ask you to leave the company. Effective today. The room fell still. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to fade. Carl exhaled slowly. No anger. No protest. Just a quiet resignation that carried more weight than shouting ever could. I understand, he said. I'll collect my things. She nodded once, eyes flicking away as if looking at him too long might shatter the last of her composure. Outside, Maya was waiting near the reception desk. When she saw Carl's face, she didn't need to ask. She fired you. He nodded. Company image, he said with a faint smile. Maya's hands balled into fists. That's ridiculous. After everything, don't, he interrupted gently. Anger's contagious. Don't catch it. I'm going to talk to her, Maya said, already turning. He stopped her with a look, calm, steady, unbreakable. No, let her fight her own reflection. Tears welled in her eyes. She doesn't deserve your grace. He smiled faintly. It's not for her. He walked down the hallway toward the maintenance room. The same path he'd taken for decades, each step echoing a little longer than before. Inside, he opened his locker one last time. He took out the folded photo album, the same one he'd found in the founder's drawer. For a long moment he stared at the image of his younger self beside the smiling man who'd once called him a friend. He placed the album carefully inside his old metal toolbox, resting it atop a worn wrench and a cracked tape measure. Relics of a life built on quiet labor. He closed the lid, the latch clicking like punctuation at the end of a long sentence. When Maya entered a few minutes later, he was already putting on his jacket. You're really leaving? She whispered. He nodded. Every story needs a pause. Maybe this one's mine. She wanted to say something, to argue, to plead, but words failed. He touched her shoulder gently. Keep that light in you. Don't let this place dim it. Then he walked past her, toolbox in hand, heading toward the elevator. As the doors closed, she saw the reflection of his shoes, scuffed, old, unpolished, but still shining faintly under the lobby lights. Upstairs, Claire sat alone in her office, the photo still glowing on her screen. The comments, the gossip, the ridicule, none of it hurt as much as the silence that followed. For the first time in her career, victory felt like loss. And somewhere deep inside, a voice she'd buried years ago whispered, "You just fired the last person who reminded you who your father really was." 3 days passed, but the echo of that decision refused to fade. The headlines had cooled, the investors were placated, the company's public image was stabilized. And yet, Claire Donovan felt none of the victory that came with control. Her office was spotless, her calendar full, and her inbox overflowing with people congratulating her on strong crisis management. But beneath every polite email was the same hollowness, a quiet awareness that something decent had been buried to keep appearances alive. On the third night after a 14-hour day, Claire drove to her mother's house, a modest 2-story on the edge of the city. It was where she'd grown up before wealth became a performance. Her mother answered the door in a soft cardigan, and the same gentle smile that had survived every storm. "You look exhausted," she said, ushering Claire inside. "I made soup. Sit down before you fall down." "I can't stay long," Claire murmured, dropping her bag by the couch. "Just needed quiet." Her mother nodded knowingly. Quiet is usually what follows a mistake. Claire managed a weak laugh. "You heard. Your name's on the news again. They make it sound like you saved the company from scandal." "Isn't that good press?" Claire asked, half smiling. Her mother's eyes were kind but sharp. "Depends on what you lost to get it." For a moment, neither spoke. The clock ticked softly from the mantel. Finally, Claire said, "I had to let someone go. It was the only way to protect the brand. The investors were questioning my judgment." Her mother stirred her tea slowly. "Was it the man from the picture?" Claire hesitated. "You saw that?" Her mother nodded. "The one with the toolbox in the background, right? That's Carl." The name struck her like a forgotten song. "You know him?" Her mother gave a quiet smile. "Of course. Your father adored that man. Called him his steady compass. Said Carl reminded him that work without humility was just noise." Claire sank back into the couch, staring at the floor. "I fired him." "I know," her mother said softly. "That's why you're here." Something inside her cracked, Not loudly, but like a whisper turning into a sob. I didn't mean to. It was supposed to be professional. I panicked. Her mother rose without a word and walked to the old oak cabinet against the wall. She opened a drawer and pulled out a leather-bound album, almost identical to the one Carl had found. The spine was worn, the corners frayed. I wasn't sure when to show you this, her mother said, setting it on the coffee table. Maybe now. Claire hesitated before opening it. The smell of old paper filled the room, faintly metallic like time itself. There were pictures she'd never seen. Her father laughing with employees, hands covered in grease. Company picnics where workers' children played tag between unfinished machines. And then she saw it, that photo. The same one from the founder's office. Her father in his prime, grinning under the sun, arms slung casually around a younger Carl Hale. To his left, a little girl clutching a paper flower. Herself. But this copy had something new. A small handwritten note in her father's bold script beneath the photo. Carl Hale, the man who stayed when others left. Claire's breath hitched. She traced the letters with trembling fingers. Her mother watched quietly. That's how your father remembered him. Not as an employee, as a partner. Claire closed her eyes, memories flickering back like fragments of film. A man crouched beside her in the courtyard, fixing the chain on her small red bicycle. You have to listen to the click, he'd said. That sound means it's catching again. Everything works better when it clicks. People too. She'd laughed as the wheel spun freely again. Thank you, Mr. Hale, he'd said, smiling. But you can call me Carl. He dusted off his hands, grease staining his fingers, and added, one day you'll run this place. Just promise me you'll remember, no one's above cleaning the floors they walk on. The memory hit so clearly that she could still hear the echo of that last sentence, layered over the silence of the room she sat in now. Claire pressed her palms to her eyes. God, what have I done? Her mother leaned forward gently. What your father always feared for you, that the walls you'd build to protect your image would start keeping people out. Tears slipped down her face before she could stop them. He was loyal to us, Mom. To me, and I threw him out like he was dirt. Her mother reached over, brushing her hair back. Then maybe it's time to clean the mess the right way. Claire laughed bitterly. I don't even know where to start. Start with truth, her mother said simply. Your father used to say it's the only thing that never depreciates in value. Claire turned back to the photo, staring at Carl's younger face, the steady eyes, the quiet pride, the kind of dignity no promotion could buy, and no headline could destroy. He stayed when others left, she murmured. And I made him leave. Her mother nodded. Then go bring him back. Claire looked up, eyes still red but voice steadier. You really think he'd even listen? Her mother smiled. He's a man who fixes things, Claire. Not just machines. People too. But you'll have to meet him as a person this time, not a position. The words landed with the weight of truth she couldn't argue with. She closed the album and held it against her chest. For a long moment she just sat there, breathing, trying to reconcile the image of the woman who had fired him with the girl in that photograph, the one smiling between a father who believed in kindness and a man who practiced it. I don't deserve forgiveness, she whispered. Then earn it, her mother said gently. Not for your title, for your father's legacy, and for your own peace. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, the same sound that used to fill their old factory yard. For the first time in years, it didn't sound like noise. It sounded like memory. Claire rose from the couch, wiping her face. I'll find him. Her mother nodded. Bring the album. You'll need proof that history remembers more than reputation. Claire clutched it tightly, almost afraid to let it go. The photo, her father, the janitor, the child she used to be, felt like a compass pointing her back to something real. As she reached for her bag, her mother called after her, voice soft but firm. And Claire, she paused at the door. When you see him, don't apologize with words. Do it with respect. That's the only language he still speaks. Claire nodded, heart heavy but clear. And for the first time since her father's death, she didn't feel like a CEO walking into battle. She felt like a daughter trying to make something right. The invitation went out quietly. No flashy marketing campaign, no press coverage, no sponsorship banners. Just a simple email from the CEO's office. Staff assembly, Friday 9 a.m. Location, Founders Hall. Theme, the legacy that built us. Inside the company, rumors bloomed like wildfire. Some thought it was another investor charm offensive. Others whispered about layoffs, or rebranding, or some speech to salvage morale after the photo incident. But only Claire Donovan knew what she was planning. For 3 nights, she had written and rewritten her speech, deleting every line that sounded defensive or polished. Each draft stripped away another layer of ego, until only honesty remained. On the morning of the event, she arrived early, clutching the old leather photo album like a lifeline. The same album her father had left behind, and the same one Carl Hale had found and protected. The hall filled quickly. Executives in tailored suits, interns balancing notepads, janitorial and maintenance staff standing uncertainly near the back. The last time Claire had spoken to the entire company, it had been about innovation metrics and quarterly growth. Today she wasn't here to talk about numbers. When she stepped onto the stage, the room quieted immediately. She looked smaller without her usual armor. No designer jacket, no clipped tone, just a simple blouse, sleeves rolled up like her father used to wear. "Good morning," she began. Her voice trembled slightly, but she didn't hide it. "I called you all here to talk about where we came from and what we've forgotten along the way." A few confused glances passed through the crowd. Claire opened the album, holding it carefully so the camera feed could project it onto the large screen behind her. "This company was built long before I took this role," she said. "Before the glass towers, before the branding campaigns, before any of us had titles. It was built by people who works failed, learned, and tried again." She turned a page. The photo appeared, her father smiling beside a group of early employees, and there, clearly visible, the young Carl Hale standing proudly beside him. "My father used to tell me that leadership isn't about standing above others," she continued, "but about standing beside them. He said a company that forgets its people forgets its soul." The hall was silent. The executives in the front row stiffened, unsure where this was going. Claire looked up from the photo. "That man beside my father, his name is Carl Hale. Some of you might remember him. Most of you probably don't. He's been here longer than almost anyone in this room. He started as an engineer, helped design our first systems, and when the company changed direction, he stayed. Not because of title or paycheck, but because he believed in what this place stood for." Murmurs rippled through the audience. A few of the older staff exchanged glances, nodding quietly. She took a slow breath. "Last week I failed him. I failed the values my father built this company on. Out of fear and pride, I made a decision that dishonored the very legacy I was raised to protect." Gasps moved through the room. Executives looked to each other nervously. CEOs didn't talk like this. Not in public. Not ever. Claire continued. "I dismissed Mr. Hale when all he had done was remind me where I came from. And in doing so, I realized something. Progress without respect is just arrogance in disguise." The projection behind her changed. A new image, from that same photo, zoomed in. Her father's handwritten words now filled the screen. "Carl Hale, the man who stayed when others left." She paused, letting it settle over them like the sound of truth landing where silence had been. "This company," she said, her voice breaking slightly, "was not built by people chasing perfection. It was built by people who stayed, who worked quietly, honestly, without needing applause. Carl Hale is one of those people." She looked out at the crowd. "And today we're bringing him back." The room erupted into whispers. Shock, disbelief, and something new, respect. Claire lifted her hand. "Mr. Hale doesn't know this yet, but I've created a new department, one that will carry his name, the Hale Initiative. It's dedicated to workplace ethics, mentorship, and remembering the human side of every innovation we pursue. I've asked him to lead it." Cameras flashed, phones lifted. Even Brett Lang, seated in the second row, froze in stunned silence. Claire closed the album gently. "Some mistakes can't be undone," she said, "but they can be learned from, and I intend to make that lesson the foundation of how we move forward." When she finished, there was no applause at first, just a wave of emotion rolling through the room. Then it began softly, one clap, then another, until the hall filled with thunderous applause that felt less like celebration and more like forgiveness. That afternoon, Claire drove to the quiet edge of the city where Carl lived. She found him outside a small workshop behind a modest house, repairing an old radio on a wooden table. He looked up as she approached. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said, wiping his hands on a cloth. "I know," she said softly, "but I needed to." He waited. She set the album down on the table. "You left this behind." "I figured it belonged where the story started," he said. She smiled faintly. "That's exactly what I thought." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of oil and metal. "I saw the note," she said finally. "My father's handwriting. The man who stayed when others left." Carl's eyes lowered. "He was too kind." "No," she said quietly. "He was right." He looked at her then. really looked, and saw the humility her father once carried. "You don't owe me anything, Claire. I owe you everything," she said, "and I came to ask for something you might not want to give." He waited, patient as ever. "I want you to come back," she said, "not as staff, as a mentor. I'm creating a division in your name to teach people what this company forgot. Integrity, respect, the value of staying when it's hard to." He was silent for a long time, staring at the ground. "Why me?" "Because you never left," she said simply, "even when the rest of us did." Carl exhaled slowly, his weathered hands folding over the album. "I'll think about it," he said. "That's all I ask." As she turned to leave, he called after her, "Claire." She looked back. "Your father would have been proud," he said. Her eyes shimmered. "You think so?" "I know so," he said. "He had a good sense for people, even the ones still learning who they are." She smiled through the tears that finally escaped. "Thank you, Carl." He nodded, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. "You're welcome, boss." But she shook her head gently. "Just Claire." That night, the company's internal feed exploded again, but this time with a different tone. Photos of the event flooded in. Staff posted clips of her speech. Comments filled with admiration. The CEO who apologized. The return of Mr. Hale. Finally, a leader who listens. For once, the internet didn't mock. It applauded. And somewhere, under the soft glow of a workshop lamp, Carl opened the old photo album one last time, running his hand over that faded picture. He smiled quietly. The company he'd built his life around had finally remembered the sound of honesty again. Carl returned quietly, without ceremony. No spotlight, no applause. Just a new nameplate outside a modest corner office that read, "The Hale Initiative, Integrity and Mentorship Division." He didn't even sit at his new desk the first day. Instead, he spent the morning walking the halls, not inspecting, not cleaning, just seeing. People nodded, smiled, whispered. Some offered quick handshakes. Others simply said, "Welcome back." And for the first time in years, those words didn't feel like courtesy. They felt like homecoming. Maya was waiting by the elevator when he reached the second floor. "You actually came back," she said, beaming. "I told you," he said, "every story needs a pause, not an ending." She laughed. "You've been quoted all over the company feed. Everyone's talking about you." He grimaced playfully. "That sounds dangerous." "It's good," she insisted. "People are different this week. Kinder. Even the higher-ups are saying thank you more." Carl smiled, setting down his toolbox, the same one he'd carried for decades, now repurposed as a symbol rather than a burden. "Then we're already making progress." His work wasn't about sweeping floors anymore, but he refused to let go of what those years had taught him. He ran small sessions with the new recruits, not meetings, just conversations. They sat in circles, sleeves rolled up, and he'd tell them stories of the old factory days. "You know what your badge means?" he'd ask, tapping the plastic ID clipped to their shirts. "It means responsibility, not rank. Everyone here keeps the lights on, just in different ways." He taught them small things that weren't in manuals: how to notice the quiet people in meetings, how to thank the cafeteria staff by name, how to pause before judging. "Respect," he said, "isn't a department. It's maintenance, the kind that never ends." Maya joined every session, helping him manage notes and schedules. The interns started calling him Mr. Hale, the heart of the building. He'd laugh and correct them gently. "I'm just the guy who reminds the heart to keep beating." Upstairs, Claire Donovan had changed too, though not in the ways that could be measured on reports. She still made sharp decisions, still led with precision, but something had softened in her presence. She started walking the floors each morning, greeting staff by name, asking small questions about their work. At first, people thought it was a PR stunt, but when it continued, day after day, month after month, they realized it wasn't performance. It was growth. She visited the Hale Initiative once a week, not to check on progress but to learn. Some days she'd just sit in on Carl's talks, sipping coffee, listening to the way people responded to him. One afternoon, after everyone left, she lingered behind. Carl was tidying up, stacking the chairs. "You ever get tired of teaching the same lessons?" she asked. He smiled. "Lessons don't change. Only the people hearing them do." She nodded, leaning against the wall. "I think about my father a lot lately, about what he'd think of me now." Carl looked at her gently. "He'd think you finally understand why he built this place." "And you?" she asked quietly. "What do you think of me now?" He chuckled softly. "You stopped running from your reflection. That's all a leader ever needs to do." For a moment, their eyes met, not as CEO and janitor, not as apology and forgiveness, but as two people standing on the same side of purpose. Outside the glass wall, employees were finishing their shifts, their chatter echoing faintly through the halls. Claire watched them go, laughing, relaxed, unafraid. Something about it filled her with both pride and humility. "You know," she said, "when I was a kid, I used to think power meant never being questioned. Now I think it's the opposite." Carl nodded. "Power's just a light. It only matters if you point it somewhere that needs seeing." She smiled. "You always talk like my father." Maybe because he talked like someone worth remembering. He gathered his things, slipping on his jacket. "Same time next week?" she asked. "Unless something breaks," he said, grinning. "Then I'll fix that first." When he left, she stayed a moment longer, gazing at the empty chairs where her employees had been sitting. Each one carried a piece of the company's rebirth, not through rebranding or profit, but through humanity rediscovered. In the weeks that followed, the changes multiplied quietly. Departments began holding legacy lunches where veterans shared stories with new hires. Complaints dropped, turnover slowed, people smiled in elevators. Even Brett Lang, who once mocked her for bonding with a janitor, found himself attending one of Carl's talks and leaving with his phone forgotten in his pocket for the first time in years. One morning, Claire passed Carl in the lobby. He was helping the cleaning crew carry supplies. "Old habits die hard," she teased. He grinned. "Good habits don't die at all." As she walked away, she glanced back once, seeing him laugh with a young maintenance worker, showing her how to balance the mop handle on her palm like a lever. That simple image, quiet, real, unfiltered, felt like everything her father had dreamed the company could be. The world outside kept spinning. Deadlines, contracts, markets. But inside Donovan Industries, something deeper had shifted. The walls no longer just reflected ambition. They reflected character. And at the center of it all was the man who stayed when others left, now teaching everyone else how to stay for the right reasons. By the end of the day, Claire stood at her office window looking down at the courtyard where sunlight hit the floor in soft golden patches. For the first time, she didn't see glass and steel. She saw people, her father's legacy, breathing again. She whispered, almost to herself, "We finally got it right." And somewhere across the hall, Carl smiled, as if he'd heard her. 6 months later, the lobby of Donovan Industries looked different. Not because of the renovations or the polished marble, but because of what hung on the wall beside the front desk. A simple framed photograph. It wasn't glossy or digitally enhanced. It was the same black and white image that had once gathered dust in a forgotten drawer. The founder, Richard Donovan, standing with his original team, sleeves rolled, smiles wide, and right beside him, younger and proud, stood Carl Hale, the man who stayed when others left. Every morning, before the building filled with noise, Carl walked through the lobby with his small polishing cloth. He didn't need to. The cleaning staff would have gladly done it, but it had become his quiet ritual, a way of saying thank you without words. He'd stop in front of the frame, adjust it slightly if it leaned, and run the cloth over the glass until the reflection was clear enough to catch the morning light. Some days a passing employee would stop to chat. Others would just nod, smiling respectfully, before hurrying to their day. But everyone, in one way or another, noticed the photo now. It wasn't just a decoration anymore. It was a compass. The small brass plaque beneath it read, "Dedicated to those who built in silence. The Hale Initiative 2025. On Fridays, Claire would arrive early, carrying a single white lily. She'd set it gently on the ledge below the frame, pause for a moment and whisper something only the walls could hear. She never stayed long, just long enough to remember. Sometimes Carl would catch her reflection in the glass and smile without turning around. "Morning, Claire." She'd smile back. "Morning, Carl. You keeping it straight?" "Always," he'd say. "Can't have the past crooked if we want the future standing tall." He was older now, hair silver at the temples, but his stride still steady. He planned to retire soon, though the company quietly pretended not to hear it every time he mentioned it. They weren't ready to let him go. Neither, in truth, was Claire. One afternoon, she found him in the mentorship room surrounded by young employees, laughing as he showed them how to read a blueprint by feel, tracing the paper lines like memory. He looked up when he noticed her in the doorway. "Just teaching them how to see the story behind the structure," he said. She smiled. "Looks like they already are." When the group left, she lingered. "I think Dad would have liked this," she said softly. Carl nodded. "He'd be proud. You brought the heart back." She looked at him. "We did." He chuckled. "You finally stopped using that word 'we' like it's paperwork." Claire laughed, and for a brief second, they were simply two people standing on the same side of history, Not CEO and janitor, but continuation and origin. That evening, as the last light faded from the lobby windows, Carl made his final round. He stood once more before the photograph, hands steady on the frame. His reflection overlapped with the image. The man he was, beside the man he used to be. He whispered, "We kept it clean, Richard." Then he smiled. The kind of smile that comes from peace, not pride. Upstairs, in her office, Claire looked out over the city her father had once dreamed of shaping. The skyline shimmered against the dusk, and for the first time in years, she didn't see distance between herself and the people below. She saw connection, the invisible threads that made everything stand. And as she watched, Carl's small figure moved through the lobby, pausing one last time at the photograph before the lights dimmed. Her father's words came back to her, words she finally understood. A company isn't made of walls, it's made of the people who believe in them enough to keep them standing. She whispered into the quiet, "We rise higher not by stepping over others, but by remembering who lifted us first." And with that, the story of the man who stayed became the story of the company that learned to remember.
Family. Call to action, CTA.
If this story moved you, tell us where you're watching from, and one word that describes how it made you feel. ChatGPT can make mistakes. Check important info.